Hello, and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and I'm excited about another kind of sciencey type show. I have Dr. Greg Matloff on, and he is going to be talking about his book, which I got in the mail a month ago. I thought for sure I'd have plenty of time to read it. I've just been very, very busy. I started reading it, and I absolutely love the book. It's called Stellar Engineering. Now, he kind of explores, or he does explore, a really intriguing thought that we might live in a Dyson swarm, Stapledon Dyson swarm of alien space habitats within our solar system's Kuiper belt. That's way out there, if you don't know, but it's pretty far up, pretty far away from here. They have, I forget exactly what it's called. I'm going to ask him, but it has to do with the distance between us and the sun, which I know is something like 92 million miles and 100 some odd kilometers. Anyway, that's the Kuiper belt is, I believe, several of those out there, and it takes a long time to get there. But it really is a fascinating book. I mean, I learned so much in the beginning of what I was reading, and he is Greg is a leading expert in the possibilities for interstellar propulsion, especially the near sun solar sail trajectories. And as you know, a couple of weeks ago, we had Dr. Avi Loeb that talked a bit about the solar sails actually, it's kind of sail technology with lasers and things like that in the Starshot program. Anyway, we'll be talking all about that. But I hope you do get a chance to read his bio. It's like a book, and that will be in our show notes. And also, I do believe that it is in the description in YouTube. As far as this week's blog, it's UFOs and astronauts. And if you are part of the podcast feed, you'll see that I posted an old interview I did with the fourth man on the moon, astronaut Alan Bean. I did that back in 2009, but he's a wonderful man. I hope if you haven't listened to it, it's in the podcast feed. It's also in YouTube. What a great attitude that gentleman had, especially when it comes to what people believe about conspiracies, that no one landed on the moon, and all that. It's a fun podcast. I hope you had a chance to check that out. So that UFOs and astronauts blog kind of goes with that. Now, Alan was part of a very unusual sighting in Skylab 2, I believe it was 1973. Can't find a lot of information about that, but I did talk to him a little bit about that a few years ago, and he was not interested in coming on the show about that. Next week, we have Frank Fascino. He's coming on to talk about the unusual Flatwoods Monster case that happened way back. He's written a book on that. It's a very interesting and weird, very strange case. And so if you go on our website, you'll see that I have some pictures from people all over the world. And it's really fun if you listen to the show and you want to send a picture that represents yourself or the area in which you live and just a first name and location. I will post it on that page. There's quite a few in there now, from all the way from Iraq to all over the world. So anyway, it's kind of fun to check that out. And the email address I have for that is gps@podcastufo.com. And also it is on the website. If you're over on the website, also you can see how to support the show if you don't. And you'd like to, for as little as $2 a month, anything helps. And I do appreciate every single listener, and I appreciate every single supporter. So that's it for all my blabbing. I'm going to bring in my guest now. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Hello, Martin. It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, you're very welcome. And I guess I'm going to ask you to start out with, in the beginning, when you were young, growing up, was astronomy and this type of thing something you had a fascination with?
My parents made a bad mistake. For my 13th birthday, they gave me a telescope.
Oh.
A 3.5 inch or roughly 5 centimeter skyscope. It was a Newtonian reflector. And I began to spend, initially we had an apartment, actually a house in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, later moved out to Queens, but also had a country house in the Hamptons. And when I was an adolescent, everybody else in the Hamptons of my age was trying to get to first base with the local girls out there. And I would spend my nights instead going out looking at things like M13, any planets in the sky, the moon, and really having a great time and starting to realize how small I am, how small we all are, and how big space is. And I began to wonder, where are they? Which of those little dots in the sky has advanced civilizations that might teach us something or destroy us, whatever they want? Up to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I was contemplating this before. I wonder what the equivalent of the first car is for another intelligence, or the first kiss, or, on another civilization. I mean, it's fascinating when you really think of it all. And the distances are just, I've said this before in the show, because I had an astrophysicist that said, basically, if the Earth was in Maryland and it was the size of a ball in a ballpoint pen, that little teeny ball, the first star would be in California, so which is amazing when you really think about the distance. And your book, Stellar Engineering, and you talk about, the possibility that intelligent life might build, something enormous, and like the Dyson sphere, the Tabby star, the thoughts on what that was.
Yeah.
But I don't want to jump ahead so quickly. If you want to just fill in a little bit about, you decided to study astronomy, and is that how that all started, after high school and all that?
Well, I knew that I was going to do something in astronomy.
Mm-hmm.
I was not a great student in high school. Basically, the guidance advisors tell my parents, get him into a trade. He's not going to make it in physics. Well,
wow.
They were wrong, but okay. So what I did is I majored in physics, and this was at Queens College, which is a division of the City University. And I was a pretty mediocre student, but I was also an amateur astronomer. My parents had a friend who was a technician at a small optical company in Queens that was called Colesman Instruments. They had built sextants in World War II, and later on Star Trackers for more advanced aircraft and spacecraft. And they needed somebody, either a bachelor's degree person in physics with an interest in astronomy, or a PhD postdoc. And of course, at that point, I would have been paid $6,000, which was a fortune back in 1965, and the astrophysicist PhD would have gotten paid about $20,000. So they decided to read the bottom line, and they hired me. And I was able to get my first papers out in applied optics before I was 22.
Before you were 22?
Before I was 22. And
wow.
What I did, because it was the peak of the space program then, it was very advantageous for the companies to put you through for a master's degree. So what I did is I went to NYU, uptown, New York University, which had a Bronx campus then, to the engineering school, the astronautics department. And they initially didn't want to take me in because I didn't have great grades as an undergraduate. And then I showed them my early papers, and immediately they hired me.
Wow.
And what I did, I studied wonderful things, planetary atmospheres, solar system astrophysics, a little bit of astrodynamics. But I realized that I would rather do research than sit and take courses. So I spoke to my advisor about it. He said, I'd come up with a research topic. And I'd read a book by a British physicist, a guy named James Strong. The book is called Flight to the Stars. And what he said is, okay, the best way we could do it now is with nuclear explosions, fusion explosions. That was Freeman Dyson's and Ted Taylor's Project Orion. And that's the best we could do at the present time. So what we do is we know a certain fraction of the energy is going to come out in fusion particles, that's your exhaust. But there's a lot of lost energy in gamma rays, neutrons, X-rays. And he said, you simply reflect this as photons. And I looked at that and said, no, you don't, that's not going to get you very much. What you have to, because photons have a low momentum. Instead, you absorb it as heat, you convert that heat to a subsidiary ion propulsion, and you can add a lot to your spacecraft speed. So that was my thesis, and my advisor loved it, and he said, by the way, submit this to a journal, and remember, I'm your thesis advisor, I'm your co-author. I learned a little bit about how academia works right then. So the paper got out, I was very happy about it, and I didn't think anything else about it. And then along come the early 1970s, I'm living communally, and a woman in the group comes up and says, gee, I have a friend who is a congressional aide in Washington, D.C. And are you aware that you've been written into the congressional record? And I said, what? I mean, I was never that radical. What did I do? And she said, oh, no, it's good. Check this out. And I went to this, and I saw that a guy named Bob Forward, who was a wonderful space scientist. Unfortunately, he died in the year 2000. But what he had done was he had been asked to write about what we could do given an infinite budget with the space shuttle. And he talked about interstellar travel. And he basically cited me and put one of my figures in. So I became an expert without even trying it at a very young age.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Good for you to do all that. And as far as, this, you have written another book. I saw that as well. And how many books have you written so far?
I believe there's 13. Counting the two books, the artist scientist books I did with my wife, C. Bangs. I think it's 13. And I'm not planning on writing anymore.
Oh, you're done? But 13's an unlucky number. You have to write one more. Yeah. Wow. 13. That's amazing. And so this one in particular, I remember somewhere reading in it about there's a type of, because I always thought if there's something like massive in the anywhere built out there, I always think of materials. Where on earth could they get the amount of materials to build something as, that surrounds like a solar system type of thing? How is that even possible? Does it have to do with very thin molecule, thick technology or something?
Okay, well, the people who really started this off was a British philosopher and science fiction writer, Olaf Stapledon, in his epic novel Star Maker in 1937. And then it was picked up by a British-American physicist, Freeman Dyson, in the year 1960. And Dyson was interested in SETI, searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, but he wanted to look at it from a new point of view. He wanted to look at it not from aliens beaming signals to us, but instead the possibility might be, rather than a radio beam, something called a techno-signature. In other words, you're looking at a signature of an alien technology. And he said, okay, if somebody took apart their big planets, their equivalent of Jupiter and Saturn, put them together in a large, basically a spherical shell, and had that spinning at the right speed, they could have one gravity on it. And basically, it could give them tremendous amounts of living space. He realized there was problems with this. And he realized that to do a complete enclosure like that probably wouldn't work because of the different dynamics. I don't want to get technical in this, but there are two forces that balance in this thing. One is centrifugal force, and one is gravity. And they're going to balance very nicely at the equator. Up near the poles, you're not going to have much centrifugal force. So basically, your thing is going to get squashed down unless it has enormous tensile strength. So probably you can't build a real shell around a star unless you can have the type of tensile strength material that exists inside atomic nuclei. So along came science fiction writers to look at this. Larry Niven, and I mean, I'm not sure many of you people have read him. He's a very interesting guy also. What Larry did is he came up with a concept called a ring world. And he said, okay, you don't have a solid sphere, but you have a ring around the star. If this is the star over here, the ring might go like this way around near its equator. And if you design that right, maybe life could actually live in that vicinity for billions of years. We had Ringworld. I believe he did it with Jerry Cornell, some of them, but I'm trying to remember. I would have to go back and dig it out of my library, which I don't want to do right now. But people could check that.
Wow. Now, yeah, go ahead.
And the idea laid sort of dormant for a while. There was a guy, I cite him in the book. I knew him from the SETI groups at the International Astronautical Congresses and radio astronomer, and he looked for infrared signatures from Stapledon Dyson spheres in basically our galactic vicinity. He didn't find any, but probably just because such things are dynamically impossible. But he did make the effort, and I cite him and describe his work. It stayed pretty dormant until 1960. I'm sorry, until 2015 or 2016, 17, I forget the exact date, when a young woman named Tabby Boyhunyan, I'm mispronouncing her name, which is why the star is called Tabby Star and not Boyhunyan Star. And the special properties of this star were very intriguing, and people have seriously considered that maybe it is a partial Stapledon Dyson sphere. And we can talk about that as we go along.
Right. I remember when that happened and all the speculation and the blowback of that speculation and all that. One of the things I couldn't believe, like in the first few pages in your book, you think of the Earth as, we get everything that exists has to do, of course we have to have water and everything else, but the sun, the energy of the sun. And even when we chop down a tree or burn wood, that is indeed the captured energy of the sun. Everything, food, you name it, everything. But now I don't know the statistics of what was in your book, but it's something like a fraction of a billionth of the sun's energy is what powers our Earth.
Yeah. Once again, the Earth is 93 million miles or 150 million kilometers from the sun. That's one astronomical unit. The Earth's radius is 4,000 miles. It's around 6,000 kilometers. So
you mean 40,000 miles?
4,000 miles.
Yeah.
The radius. So the diameter is around 8,000. So you can think that it takes up a very, very, very tiny fraction of its loop around the sun. So much of the solar energy doesn't strike us. And this is really what got to Stapledon and Dyson later on, that a truly advanced civilization might want to tap into more of that energy.
Wow. That fascinates me. We do get questions in the chat, and I ask that if someone has a question for you that they put it in caps, which this person did, this anonymous Rex. His question is, can a Dyson sphere occur in nature?
I don't think so. I would hate to rule anything out, but I've never heard of any way that it could be produced naturally. But nature is strange. You can have all types of weird things that we don't know about.
That's right. Yeah, like the Oumuamua that came through. That's a good example right there. And so if this, you talked earlier about SETI and the radio signals, and I've had Dr. Seth Shostak on, I think three times on this show, and at least they're looking for something. But I think the techno signatures, when we have the ability to actually look for them, that's going to be a lot more interesting. That's what I think. I mean, what do you think about that?
I agree. We do have the ability now to look for partial Dyson Stapledon spheres. Or should we call them Dyson Stapledon swarms? That might be better.
Can you explain what that, I'm sorry, do you mind explaining what the swarm, the difference is?
Okay, and this is something that Dyson talked about later on as he developed the concept further. What it is people realized building a spherical shell around a star might really not work. But instead, there's plenty of material around that star. And what you could do is you could create a whole swarm of space habitats. Now, the space habitat idea goes back to the early 1970s. A guy named Jerry O'Neill at Princeton University, and later on people at Stanford, NASA Ames, and elsewhere continued this. And it was basically to demonstrate that you can build artificial little worldlets in space, which we now call space habitats. If it has an engine, it's a world ship, something like that. It would be small, but you could duplicate terrestrial ecology to a certain extent. If you watch the movie Interstellar, the popular movie Interstellar, towards the end of that, there is people are living, 4,000 people or so, are living in a O'Neill type space habitat, which is located between, I believe, near the orbit of Saturn, because they want to ultimately get into the black hole and fly to their destination. But it does demonstrate that the idea has caught on. Also, there was a TV science fiction series, I believe Babylon 5. And Babylon 5 was the last of the large space colonies. And or free-flying space habitats, we should call them.
A lot of times you'll see on some of these, I love science fiction, and I think a lot of great ideas come from science fiction, and maybe vice versa, I'm not sure. But when you see some of these space habitats, they are orbiting to maintain like a natural gravity inside. Is that something that would actually work? Like if it orbits, would it create a gravity?
Oh, yeah. In fact, there was an experiment on one of the early Gemini flights in which the Gemini had rendezvoused with an Agena. And an astronaut did a spacewalk. It might have been Buzz Aldrin, actually, who did this, who attached a tether to the Agena. And then they decoupled and they spun for a bit at a slow rate. But they were able to get a low level of partial gravity and demonstrate that the concept works.
I believe you might have your mail open or something. If you wouldn't mind closing that. Unfortunately, the noise is popping across the screen.
How do I do this without...
You want to go to your mail application on the top, and then just do close, if you would. The
mail. I do see. All right, I see AOL mail. I do a close. I hit the X on that, right?
Yeah. Anything. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. It went out. Good. Okay.
Okay. Good. So thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. I can't remember what I asked you. I just asked you a question, right?
I think we were talking about space habitats.
Yes. And so they could create they created a low level gravity. So in theory, that means that they could indeed create a natural, like Earth gravity.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you remember also in the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey, the space station does spin, and it has, I don't know if it's Earth gravity or lunar gravity, but it's certainly at least a partial gravity.
Yeah. I know at, I remember, I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Scott, the longest living person on, in the space station. And he has a twin brother. When he came back, something changed a little bit between the twins.
Yeah.
But also being in a weightless environment really plays havoc. And in your book, you talk about some of the lengths of time that there would have to be travel. So that would really have to be addressed if that type of travel does happen.
Yeah, if we are going to Mars by either chemical propulsion, nuclear propulsion, solar propulsion, anything we could do today, the ion drive, basically you're going to be away from home for something like upwards of 2 years. Each one-way flight takes 9 months. Then you have to wait for the planets to come back into configuration so you could come home. So you have to feel that people are going to be exposed to weightlessness and galactic cosmic radiation for upwards of a year. And that's not good.
Yeah. That's another thing. I mean, how can they shield? I mean, for an effective way to shield, how do you do that? Is it only lead? I mean, I've heard of something about circulating fluids of some kind through.
Yeah. For a self-shielded spacecraft, basically something which shields itself, which doesn't have any extra shielding. The maximum amount of time that an astronaut could spend in it without having a 5% chance of dying of cancer later on, over his normal probabilities of that happening, about 300 days, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if we're going to do a round trip to Mars, we either have to have a very, very energetic spacecraft, or we have to carry additional shielding. There's a number of ways of doing this. One way is to just have a lot of mass shielding. Another possibility is to have a magnetic field that shields you. Now, the problem with magnetic fields today is to have something, most of our superconducting material works best at low temperatures. And what you have to do is shield it so that it doesn't become a regular conductor. And the shielding itself and the circulating cooling or warming fluids, whatever you're using, are expensive and cumbersome and heavy. Another possibility that people have talked about is medicine. There are certain creatures, the famous tardigrade, that apparently can repair itself from radiation damage. There also is a variety of bacteria that likes to live inside the core of nuclear reactors. Very happy.
Wow.
So
amazing.
Maybe we can see how they do it, and we can do little genetic work inside the astronauts, something of that nature. Another possibility people have talked about is hibernation. If you have a crew, say, of 6 people, but only 2 have to be awake at any one time, the others can basically be in a stack. And the other 2 can have a very small habitat. They don't need as much room. So you have less shielding. And that is another possibility. That was the one that was used also in 2001, which was a flight, if you remember, Discovery's flight to Jupiter.
Yeah. Wow. By the way, it was Mark and Scott Kelly. Thank you, Jenny, for that.
Mark, I believe, is the senator and Scott is the astronaut, I think. Is that right?
I don't know. You got me there. Yeah, I had the names backwards. I had, but anyway. Now here is another question that popped up here. Could small alien space habitats exist nearby in our vicinity without our detecting them?
Excellent question. And I started thinking about this in the late 80s, early 90s. What happened is there was the guy, Mike, his last name, forget his last name, a radio astronomer at Maryland University. And what Mike did is he basically said, if there are aliens in the solar system, a good place to look for them is in the asteroid belt. So he looked at infrared signatures of medium-sized and small asteroids from the Infrared Explorer satellite. And nothing was discovered. But I think you want to go further afield. There is a region called the Kuiper Belt. Actually, it's not exactly, I'm going to mispronounce it because Kuiper is Dutch. It's Kuiper Belt, something like that. Kuiper is the best most of us can do in the United States. It is a region between 30 and 50 or 60 astronomical units from the sun. And one astronomical unit, once again, is 93 million miles or 150 million kilometers. This is the region where Pluto is, Charon, its large satellite, its other satellites, the other Kuiper Belt objects we've begun exploring. These are ice bodies. They have all the materials, volatile materials, as well as rocky materials, that an alien civilization would need to set up space habitats. So there was a contest, I believe in 1996, held by a group called the Discovery Institute. And they wanted new versions of SETI, new things to do in SETI. And I wanted to win because I wanted to buy an upgraded Mac, not this one. It was better than the one I had. So I really wanted that $3,000 or $5,000. I forgot how much. So I basically titled this essay, The Re-Enchantment of the Solar System. And I basically went through the numbers and I said, look, there could be objects sitting out there in the Kuiper Belt that even if they're of substantial size, 20 or 30 miles across, they're too small for us to see. And I won the prize, which I was very happy about.
Nice.
And okay, it was great to do that. And later on in about 2004, 2005, I did a couple of papers in the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society. One was co-authored with Tony Martin, who at the time was the editor of it. And we basically looked at the infrared signatures of artificial habitats in the Kuiper Belt. And then we tried to see if any of the large Kuiper Belt bodies indicated anything quite that red. And of course, nothing else did at this point. But it really scratched the surface of the Kuiper Belt. There was only one effort to find an object in the Kuiper Belt of the appropriate size of a space habitat. And this was after the New Horizons flew by Pluto and its satellites. They wanted to go for another destination, which is called MU-69 or Ultima Thule. And they wanted to find another destination. How were they going to do it? They even had the Hubble Space Telescope at their disposal. They said the only way to do it, we were going to have to look at stars along the equatorial belt of the solar system, or it's called the ecliptic, and try to see if there were any stars that are eclipsed. If they're eclipsed, something's moving in front of them, a transit. Maybe there's a big, a 20-mile size space object near there. And after months of studying, they found one. But it was a lot of effort. And to do this, we estimated that, other people estimated that, they do in the book, that the magnitude of one of these things, visual magnitude, is about 26. The best that the Hubble has done is magnitude 29, and that had to be looking at a particular star field for something like 90 hours or 90 days, I forget how long. So, these things, there could be thousands of them out there. There could be millions or billions of aliens in our solar system. Now, other people have looked at this in a circumspect fashion. I know you had Avi Loeb on a while ago. He did a paper with Ed Towns, and they both love the city of Tokyo. And they said, okay, let's see what Tokyo, the lights of Tokyo would look like in the Kuiper belt. And they published a paper about this, detecting the lights of a space city. And they get pretty much the results that I do. We could do it, but it'll be very, very difficult. Now, other people have started to come on board in a strange way. Not everybody wants to say that there's a possibility of there being aliens in the solar system right now, but maybe there have been in the past. Or maybe they've come through and left calling cards. So maybe there are probes. Maybe there are abandoned habitats. Maybe there are other types of artifacts, even on the moon. Or like my colleague Jim Benson thinks, among objects, this group of asteroids that co-rotate, co-revolve with the Earth periodically. So, you know, people are doing it, but they're being very, very safe because they don't want, in general, to appear as if they're saying the aliens are here. And I have no trouble with that. The aliens might well be here. But if they're here, they are so far in advance of us that what our commonality might be very, very limited. In 2013, as I talk about in the other book a lot, the one on consciousness, panpsychism really, the whole universe is conscious, the Europeans launched an observatory called Gaia to map very accurately positions and motions of 1 billion stars in the Milky Way. And something very funny about this, when they had the second data release, they sent it to the Hayden Planetarium. And since I'm a Hayden associate, and I know Neil deGrasse Tyson, Denton Abel, all other people there, my wife and I were invited to this. And we sat in the dome, and they projected on the dome 1 billion stars from this. And I said, what happens if they found another 10 stars? And Dyson said, the dome will collapse. Can't stand the weight. And of course, it was all right, but it was very funny. But anyway, two things that came out of this. Periodically, at intervals of 500,000 to 1 million years, a relatively massive star makes a close approach to the sun within a light year, within 60,000 astronomical units.
That's a fact? That's
yeah. Now
wow.
We know, and the next one I think is going to be, I think it's in 70,000 years, and I believe I forget if it's 70,000 years in the future or the past, but it came within a third of a light year. So this happens periodically. So aliens, if they have advanced technologies, they can hop over at 1/4 the flight duration that would ordinarily take. People say when they get to the nearest star, it takes 1,000 years. If the nearest star is a lot closer, it only takes 200 years. So it's not as daunting. Another thing is people have come to realize, also from Gaia, the sun is a relatively young star. Most stars in our vicinity of the Milky Way are more than 1 billion years older than us. And that's amazing. So, you know, you can do a very simple thought experiment. Let's say that there's a civilization that basically builds space habitats in the solar system, as we're starting to do. And it decides it's going to migrate only once every 500,000 years or so when another star is very close. So then you say that it goes up by the number of habitats you have go up by a factor of 2 every 500,000, 1 million years. Well, after 20 or 30 or 35 million years, one civilization has occupied the galaxy. And it's very easy to do. You just do 2 to the nth power, and you put in your computer n is equal to 35 or so, and you can see it's up in the billions. So you then could say, well, you know, how common are civilizations? There's a group of physicists called the rare Earth people. They used to say, well, there aren't going to be many places like the Earth because solar systems are rare. Wrong. Then he said, well, there aren't going to be many Jupiters. Jupiters protect terrestrial planets from asteroid and comet impacts.
Yeah.
Wrong.
I thought they did.
Yeah, no, but they're wrong in that they said there weren't going to be very many Jupiters.
Oh.
Wrong. They're all over the place. But then they said there are not going to be very many rocky planets within the habitable zone of stars. Wrong again. Even the very nearest star, a red dwarf called Proxima Centauri. And the nearest star, it's one of the 3 stars in the Alpha Centauri system, has a habitable planet, a planet within the habitable zone. And it's even suspected now that the brightest star in that system, Alpha Centauri A, which is a bit brighter and older than the sun, may well have a planet in the habitable zone. It still has to be confirmed. So then they can say, well, okay, you can have habitable planets all over the place, but if life forms, we have to expect that life will form physically. It's going to stay very simple. How are you going to make the jump from unicell to multi-cell life? Going to be very, very difficult, take billion years. Maybe it'll never happen. Wrong again. A few years ago, there was a group that took a very simple number of one-celled microorganisms, yeast, and they stressed them from an environmental point of view. I forget what they did, but they formed a colony organism. They formed multicellular yeast. So I think, you can come out and have great filters. That's another thing. You can say that, okay, you're going to reach a point where a number of things can happen to damage or destroy your ecosystem. Maybe an asteroid hits. I took out the dinosaurs, not all of them, not the avian dinosaurs, but the ones that didn't have feathers and wings 65 million years ago. The dinosaurs, unfortunately, no matter how intelligent they were, didn't have a space program. But if you disagree with me, read one of the latest novels by Greg Benford and Larry Niven, Bowl of Heaven and Shipstar, and you can see maybe then, maybe I'm being a little pessimistic about the dinos. I don't know. But anyway, you are left with the possibility, unless you can say everybody blows themselves up with nuclear war. We have had the capability to do that for about 80 years now. We haven't blown ourselves up. If we survive another 80 years, we almost certainly will have at least one space habitat that can be modestly independent of the Earth, and we will survive. Then you can say, okay, there's climate change. Well, yeah, there is climate change. That is a problem, but we're starting to deal with it. And most people in the United States, at least, and I think over most of the world, accept that this is a major problem today. Particularly, I don't have children, but if you have children, you have to look at this very seriously. And I think people are starting to do that. So we might get through this filter as well.
Yeah.
So since you need only a few civilizations to populate the galaxy in far less than 1 billion years, and you certainly have the time to do it, you basically have to say, if they are not in the Kuiper belt, somebody's thought processes have to be changed.
Amazing. Wow. That's really great. It really is, just something to think about, when you're thinking about the possibility of these, some of these planets that have been around much longer than we have. But again, like you just said, the filter, were societies, did they wipe themselves out like we could very well do and start over again? Would they would have enough time to actually do that and go beyond our technology a couple of times, if that's what happened.
There's also another filter that I didn't mention, and this is basically the psychocybernetic filter. According to people like Wolfram and others at Wolfram Mathematical and others, computers will have the capability to have human consciousness uploaded to them within the next few decades.
That's amazing.
Now, basically, a civilization, people in it are going to make a choice. And the choice is, do we go and live immortally in a virtual world? Basically, play video games for about 5 billion years, very deep under the earth, completely safe from any major catastrophe. Okay, do we do that? Or do we expand in space? Maybe we can do both, or maybe a society makes a choice, one way or the other, to be inward-looking or outward-looking. I don't know. No, nobody knows.
Are you saying along the lines like if your consciousness, I mean your whatever it is uploaded to a machine, that machine could travel in space and play video games while they're traveling for 1 million years?
They could certainly do that, and people have suggested that. I think. I have to look at. I'm not going to find this book right now. There is a famous physicist who basically talked about the physics of immortality, and he says in this that there's not going to be natural humans who travel to the stars. There's going to be virtual humans, uploaded souls inside computer chips, inside starships.
Wow, that's
maybe so.
Yeah. The other thing, though, I'll just throw this at you, too. Is there perhaps a chance that we haven't figured out something in physics that another alien technology has figured out as far as travel?
Yeah. What I do is I concentrate on known physics. Basically, most of the ships, interstellar ships and interplanetary ships I've talked about, have used the pressure of light, solar sailing. And that's also, I do some of this work. That's why I know Avi Loeb with the breakthrough Starship people out in California. Now, in 1990, the early 90s, I forget when it was, I was asked to be an unpaid consultant on a science fiction novel. And people said, why was I going to be an unpaid? Why did I accept this? The author was Buzz Aldrin.
Oh.
And his book called Encounter with Kuiper, he did it with John Barnes. And what Buzz did is he said, okay, your first ship is going to be a standard light sailor designed for me, solar sailing, and then using laser push after that. I've done it 100 times. It was easy. He had another guy, Chelsea Orpoff, who did it also. And they said, all right, Greg, for your next challenge, I want a spacecraft that can get up to 99% the speed of light, no antimatter. What was I going to do? So I spoke with a few people in quantum mechanics, and I realized that in every little bit of vacuum, there's a tremendous amount of energy, a giant amount of energy, but it cancels itself out. Could we ever stabilize it? That's what happened at the Big Bang. One little tiny thing, a tiny, tiny fraction of a micron across, stabilized, and that became our universe. Could we ever tap into this? This is called the Casimir effect. Could we get net energy from it? Now, the Casimir effect works, if I can use 2 books as prompts. Basically, you have 2 electrically charged objects, metal plates. They're separated by maybe a micron. There is 2 forces going on. There's the electrodynamic force. There's also the Casimir effect. That is because not all of the vacuum fluctuations can get inside. So it tends to push this together. Casimir discovered this in 1948 when he was looking at the way the hydrogen molecule works. I'm sorry, the water molecule. And he was able to demonstrate that something like 30% of the force holding it together is the Casimir effect. This was actually known to the Romans. They didn't know what it was. They knew if you had 2 metallic plates and you kept them together, they were hard to separate. The problem is, if you have the 2 plates, you let them come together, you get force out of it, but then you have to separate it. Nobody knows how to do this and get net force out. Separating, you have to put exactly as much force into it as you got out of it. maybe there's a way. But anyway, I came up with a Casimir effect space drive, and I had a Casimir laser. Buzz loved it. And I later presented it at the first breakthrough conference at NASA Glenn, as it's now called. It was in Cleveland, NASA Lewis, it was called then. Mark Millis put this on. And okay, it was a lot of fun. I didn't think much about it, but periodically people come up with what might be space drives, might require new physics. One of these is by a guy named, Sonny White is now considering it, called the EM drive. And basically it is a microwave tube configured like a rocket. So he figures he's getting a thrust out because of the nozzle. It shouldn't work, according to conventional physics. Maybe it doesn't work. There's all types of possibilities because the force that's coming out is so small, but it's still very much alive and it has to be tested. And groups like NASA and the British Space Agency and others, and maybe the Chinese, there's some talk that the Chinese have tested it in space and it works perfectly. But that just might be propaganda. I have no way of knowing. Another group doing something similar is with the what's the group? John Woodward and Heidi Fern. And it's basically another type of drive which might also use the vacuum in one way or another. And it's possible, not impossible, that these things actually could give you good thrust. The problem is it's very hard to prove. And there's a lot of skepticism.
Yeah. I know there's always speculation of what's going on in the skunk works, what they're trying to develop there. We are going into break in about 2 minutes, but getting back to space travel, this question was asked earlier. I wanted to make sure I got it up from Night Stew. Has there been a study to see what the effects of prolonged space travel have on epigenetics? And isn't that what they did with Kelly?
That's the way they did it. They did it with the two twins. One became senator. Could the astronaut Kelly still handle a filibuster? I haven't heard any of the results, but I know that there are now genetic differences between these two formerly identical twins. Because one spent a year in space. So yes, that's a great question. That is the only study so far on humans. It is possible there have been studies on animals or plants or bacteria that I don't know about.
Yeah. Well, we're right at the point of break, so we might as well jump into break now. So for those of you at KGRA Radio, we'll be back right after these messages from YouTube. I have a short clip, and then we're going to have a little dead air for about a minute or so. So hang in there. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everyone. My guest tonight is Greg Matloff, and I'm having a great discussion. I hope you all are enjoying it. And here he is. Wow, we're on the wrong side here. Let me bring you back over here. So, yeah, a fascinating subject, because you really have to think of, if someone's not uploaded in a machine, their body's going to, suffer consequences. And one of the things that makes me think of, and just to throw at you as well, is as far as, say, an evolution on a planet. I mean, there are I talked to an astronomer friend, or he has brought this up, that obviously, bipedal and bipedal and binocular vision are something optimal because of all the different species on this planet that have that. I mean, we might agree that that's a possibility that they would develop in that way, but when things come into play like different gravities, I mean, that's a major thing. I mean, there's so many different major things, but gravity is a big thing. And how do you think that would affect the development of a species?
Well, in different ways. And also, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague back there. His name is Principium.
Wait a minute. Let's get a shot on that.
Okay.
Wow.
He likes podcasts, he likes Zoom meetings, and he also likes the Blackboard with my students and
wow.
the online astronomy that I teach. So,
are you sure that's not a bear rug?
and he also. No, I'm kidding. Principium, he also proved
kidding.
himself as a mouser the other day. I it up.
Oh, that's funny.
Okay, yeah. I thought we'd introduce him well. Anyway, I can let people look at it. The question that you basically raised about gravity is very interesting. In a low gravity world, let's say if Mars has about 40% the gravity that the Earth does. If it were a bit warmer, it might have been able to hold on to its oceans. Creatures there would tend to have probably longer legs. They would be, more slender than we are because of that low gravity. And it's very possible that if Elon Musk is correct and we build a city on Mars. Oh, he's leaving. Okay, he's had enough. If you build a city on Mars in the next couple of decades, it's not beyond the range of possibility that the whole epigenetics thing will start working, that people will change to adapt to the new environment. And so will the other life that we bring with us. Trees, for instance, might be taller and more slender. Imagine a giraffe 30 feet tall. That would be interesting. All of this could certainly be the case. Also, in a high gravity world, you would tend to be squashed in, probably, unless maybe you're living in the seas. You could be in a higher gravity world with a dense atmosphere. And this is something that Carl Sagan and Anne Dryon talk about, I believe, in Cosmos. And they mentioned the fact that one type of life, not a terrestrial life, but a strange alien life you might think about, are blimp-like creatures living in the atmospheres of gas giants like Jupiter. And fast-moving giant blimps, and then you might have little balloon fighters running in as the predators to eat the blimps. So, we can't rule out an ecology like that. Also, not only do we have to deal with gravity, we have to deal with local chemistry effects, things like that. Look at Titan, for instance. Titan is very cold, but in many ways, from a chemical point of view, its surface is not dissimilar from that of the Earth, say 4 billion years ago when life was just getting started. So life might have begun there. In fact, when life first starts on the Earth, it is oxygen-hating life. And it excretes oxygen as a waste product. And later on, there's a mutation, and creatures come along who can live off this oxygen, and they love it. And the oxygen, the aerophobes, I believe they're called, end up being exiled to the ocean, the deep ocean vents and places like that. It's really the only time you see them. They come up during El Nino events. Now, you could have a whole ecology on Titan based upon this. So even the concept of the habitable zone has to be enlarged. The talk about a habitable zone is it's an idealization. You say you take the Earth mathematically, you've created the Earth, same properties as the Earth. You put it around the sun, around another star. You move it closer to that star or to the sun until the oceans start to boil. That is the inner, by definition, that's the inner limit of the habitable zone. Then you bring out this Earth further out to the point where the oceans start to freeze. That is the outer limit. In our solar system, there were only 2 habitable planets according to that definition. The Earth is smack dab in the middle of it. Mars is just at the outer fringe, which is why some people still say there might be some life on Mars today. It might not be completely extinct. But then you have to realize this was an idealization. People began making other discoveries. One discovery was that there's a moon of Jupiter called Europa. Europa has an ocean which is probably something like 30 or 40 kilometers deep. And it was supposed to be a completely frozen ocean, but they noticed, hey, there's cracks in the ice. In fact, some people joked about it and said the Martian Canal has migrated to Europa. It didn't exist on Mars. But what seems to happen is because of the proximity of this planet to Jupiter, tidal effects, and maybe other effects too, deep inside the planet, internal heating inside the satellite, raise the temperature in places above the melting point, the freezing point of water. So you could have life there. And,
now that's sort of like
remember in one of the sequels to 2001.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say in one of the sequels to 2001, the alien species who have put the monolith in really aren't interested in us, they're interested in Europa. And they give a message to terrestrial people when they convert Jupiter into a sun. And they say, all these worlds are yours, but don't you dare touch Europa. And it's very interesting. So there might be something there. Also Titan. And finally, we've now discovered that there are internal heat sources in many, probably most solar system bodies larger than the big asteroids. Ceres, which was just visited by a US probe, surprisingly to everybody, seems to have an internal heat source. Every major planet does, but Uranus, whatever knocked Uranus on its side, probably killed it billions of years ago. Great, poor Uranus.
Yeah, wow. So the planet you mentioned, the moon you mentioned, with the internal water over ice and the cracks. The tidal effect, is that, I know there's some type of effect that's kind of like kneading bread when you work it and it gets warm, because it's kind of like squishing together and moving apart. Is that kind of what?
That would be doing it.
Yeah.
And that's one possibility. And of course, they could also, another possibility is this. In, I believe it's either the Central African Republic or Gabon, one of the African states, about 2 million years ago, deep underground, there was a natural nuclear reactor that operated for 500,000 years. And what happened is uranium and other maybe radio fissile material came together under high pressure and stayed there long enough for a lot of energy to be generated. This might also be where what is the cause of deep focus earthquakes. Deep focus earthquakes still occur in places even not on fault zones. There was one 20 or 30 kilometers below New York City in 1986 or 87, which I remember very well. It just made a very big bang. That was all that it did, and the air pressure fell. But this might well be caused by local radioactive heating. And this is going to go on inside bodies other than the Earth. Our moon may have it too. The moon seems to be geologically dead in those places, but there's one crater, I believe Aristarchus is its name, that occasionally seems to put out a puff of something, indicating that there's something going on deep underneath. Bless you.
I thought I muted my mic. How important is a magnetosphere? You know, I understand that Mars probably had one at one point, and that was, you mentioned that it might have been too cold to hang on to its water. I thought you said something like that.
Yeah.
But can life survive without a magnetosphere around a planet?
Well, that's a good question. The magnetosphere protects us from galactic cosmic rays. It turns out that astronauts in low altitudes, space stations or low altitude space hubs that will be building out to maybe a few thousand kilometers orbiting the Earth are relatively safe because you have the Earth below you, which is shielding you from 50% of the galactic cosmic rays. And then you have the Earth's magnetosphere, which are cutting out a lot more of them. So you do pretty well. But periodically, things happen to the magnetosphere. There was an experiment done in Great Britain after World War II. They knew at this point that the Earth had two cores. The central core is mostly solid iron and nickel. The outer core is mostly molten iron and nickel. They rotate at different rates because they're not rigidly attached. The feeling was that's what produced the magnetosphere, the magnetic field. So they set up in the laboratory a version of this, a small model, and they watched it evolve. And then they noticed, heck, the poles are flipping. Periodically, the poles flip. So people started to wonder, does that happen on the Earth too? And then you come back to a little Cold War cover-up, because that's how this was discovered. People realized in the 1960s and 1970s that sooner or later a Russian nuclear submarine would sink. And it did. 2 American nuclear submarines sank, or 3 or 4, I forget how many, Russian nukes. Could we develop a ship that could basically retrieve this and learn something about their nuclear technology? So Hughes Aerospace was commissioned to build a ship, but they realized this would be piracy. So they needed a cover for this. 2 ships were discovered. One was called the Explorer, and I forget what the Challenger. The Glomar Challenger and Glomar Explorer. One was going to do publicized work along a region of in the mid-Atlantic called a Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is a volcanic region, looking at old crust, getting further and further from the volcanoes. As you go further and further out, the crust gets older. I'm looking at the magnetic alignment of the solidified iron. And while the other one was secretly retrieving, illegally retrieving, and Russian secrets, and apparently they gave the Russian sailors a military funeral. They were very nice that way. They admitted this after the end of the Cold War, of course. But the other ship was able to bring back samples from this ridge, and what they demonstrated is that at intervals of 100,000 years or so, the Earth's magnetosphere does flip. The South and North poles flip. Basically, the magnetic field lines come out of the North Pole in a magnet and go into the South Pole. Now, on the Earth, the North Pole is really the South Pole, but don't worry about it. Don't. But there's some indication that the magnetosphere might be getting a little unstable, and sometime in the next 1,000 years or so, it might do a flip. I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Yeah, but what about my GPS?
It might certainly affect the satellites. Yeah. And what will happen is the radiation level at Earth's surface will go up a bit. People probably won't go out as much without maybe lead parasols, or spend more time in their local subway stations, do things like that.
Wow, doesn't sound like a lot of fun.
If you have a house, the value of your insured basement, your finished basement will go way up.
all the preppers will be so happy they'll be in their bunkers.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you for a couple of opinions, and I know a lot of people in science really don't like to answer like opinion type questions, but you seem like a pretty open-minded person. So do you think it's possible that this new rover that landed on Mars is going to find at least ancient life? Do you I think it's possible, and I just wonder what your thoughts were.
Well, I think it's possible, and I hope it does. I hope it does, or I believe the Chinese rover, which hasn't landed yet, will also have life detection apparatus. I hope that it really succeeds. In fact, there are people who say still today that the Viking experiment in 1976 was not as negative as people say. You may remember that there were two landers from NASA, Viking 1 and Viking 2.
Yeah.
Each of them had 3 life detection devices. The first one, they got headlines said, Mars has life. The second one said, I think it's an active surface chemistry. We have to wait for the third one to decide. And the first one said, I'm not sure. So basically, the conservative people said Mars does not have life. Then in 1995, there was a woman, Roberta Stone, a geologist at NASA, Johnson, I believe, who was on a expedition to the South Pole, and she found a nice green meteorite.
Right.
Knew what that was. She said, I know by the color, that's from Mars.
Yeah.
And it's not naturally from the poles. So it became known as Alvin, ALH 1995 001, something like that. And they brought it back and they analyzed it very carefully. And it is possible that there are very, very small fossilized microorganisms. It is also possible that it's some type of crystallization effect. We're going to have to see what's there. Hopefully, this sophisticated spacecraft, Perseverance, or the Chinese lander, I forget its name, will hopefully find something. I would love it if there was something alive now, but we'll see.
Yeah. I remember, I think Bill Clinton was in office at that time. And, one of the things I got out of that was, wow, there could be, evidence of that there was life on Mars. And I thought that was a really big story. And then you didn't hear about it anymore. Like it would seem like you would, if it was a possibility of life elsewhere, that would be the biggest story of, the millennial.
Because they couldn't do it conclusively.
I see.
Prove absolutely, like with the Viking experiment.
But with all our technology today, we still can't take that sample and figure out if it was an organism?
What we might have to do is, and there are plans of doing this rover is going to retrieve a number of samples and put them in plastic baggies and put them back on its tread tracks. Then there's going to be a European rover that's going to follow these tread tracks in a few years, retrieve the baggies, and bring them back to a rocket. And the rocket is going to return these things to Earth. Now, not everybody likes this. If you've seen the Andromeda strain, or maybe The Man Who Fell from Space, David Bowie, you might say, well, maybe it's not such a good idea to bring this stuff right back to the Earth. But yeah, some biologists are saying they have to get it into a lab somewhere, either on the surface of Mars, the surface of the Earth, or in an orbiting facility, a space station. And then they can do the experiments on it and really determine, is it alive or not with certainty.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how life fights so hard to survive in all these odd places, acidic places, and kind of recently, weren't they thinking that there was a possibility of some type of life detection in Venus in the upper atmosphere or something?
When you look at Venus, Venus has been very well explored, mostly by the Soviets, to a lesser extent by the US. We know that its surface is ridiculously hot, an atmospheric pressure 90 times that of the Earth. And if that's not bad enough, there is acid rain falling. It is probably very close to Dante's vision of hell from the Middle Ages. But about 30 or 40 kilometers up in the atmosphere of Venus, there is a clement zone. And if there's water vapor there, it is not impossible that there could be life. So one research group has come up with observations of what might be phosphine. And the theory is, if it is indeed phosphine, the most likely way of producing it is an organic process. But there might be others. Once again, we don't know for sure. We're going to have to go back to Venus and do something in those clouds, probably with equipment suspended from balloons, something like that.
Yeah, all fascinating. All right, here's the other opinion question. You know, this is in the title of my show, is the word UFO. And I wondered what your opinion is with, say, I'm just going to throw out, I don't know if you followed any of this or watched any of it, but, you know, the Pentagon released some videos and do you think there's a possibility? And I'm not going to say that it's extraterrestrial because I don't want to say for sure, but do you think these things are possible that they're seen here in the skies?
I have evolved in this direction, and I'll tell you how this happened. In 1970, my first academic position was as a research associate and teaching assistant at the Van Vleck Observatory in Wesleyan University, Middletown, Connecticut. And I had done a stint at Grumman after being at Colesman. And I get a call from the Grumman astronomer, Lou Smith, saying, Greg, we're doing an experiment on Apollo 13. We're calling all of our friends at observatories to observe this. And if you see the movie Apollo 13, I know most viewers probably have, in the very beginning of the movie, there was a urine dump as the spacecraft is leaving Earth orbit. And people say, why are they doing that? It's not explained. They don't have to get rid of that little bit of extra weight. It was an experiment. What they were doing was creating an artificial comet. They asked the astronauts to pee, if I can use that word, on the urinate on the podcast, and then they collected it and they expelled it into space, and it began to expand. And I got the telescope going, the 20-inch refractor, and also we had students on a 6-inch refractor, and having a lot of fun with it. And you could see the Apollo spacecraft in the center as a solid dot. You could see the 3 fairings spinning in space, twinkling like stars. And then you could see this expanding, beautiful star-like hazy object. And then the phone rang. And Roger Grossenbacher, who was the senior observer, looked at me and laughed. He said, Greg, this is your project. You're taking the calls tonight. I picked it up. Guys on the other end. Hello? Who am I speaking to? I'm Greg Matloff. I'm astronomer at Wesleyan. And who am I speaking to? He gave his name. You have something you'd like to talk about? Yes, I am observing a UFO. It is about 30 degrees above the southern horizon. It is as bright as the second magnitude star. And I then said, we're observing the same thing. What you are seeing is a urine dump from Apollo 13. When they were silent. And then he said very loud, Well, then you're in the conspiracy, and the phone slammed down.
Uh-huh.
Later on, somebody called back, maybe the same guy about the same thing. So I became a little negative about UFO conspiracy theories. People like them. And then later on, in 1986, my wife, C. Bangs, who's an artist, was working as an artist for the Department of Parks and Recreation in New York City. And they needed an astronomer in the parks because when Halley's Comet came by, they had no idea what to do. They were embarrassed. So they hired me as a consulting astronomer. And did this for 4 years until there was a financial crisis, and we all got laid off. But before that, in 1990, there was the Casino Park UFO incident. 3 nurses in Queens are sitting in their bus going home from the local hospital after shift late at night. They look over at Casino Park, which is not far from Queens College, where I got my bachelor's degree. And they say, oh my God, there are lights over the park. We have to report this to somebody. They could have called the police. They could have called the park department. They could have called NASA. No. They brought in a professional ufologist. There are such people. The professional ufologist walks back in that direction, and he keeps walking until he comes to dead spots in the grass. He said, well, this is where UFOs landed. Then he takes out his compass and he looks at the lamppost near them. And he says, all these are magnetized. That's from the UFO. And he starts getting an enormous amount of attention in the local press. And these local presses are for free. But of course, people pick them up and they read them for the ads. And the advertisers are spending good money because the circulation is going up. So the Parks Department says, Greg, you have to get in there and you have to find out the truth of this. So I went in, first of all, went in with a ranger. We reasoned the lights, if the nurses had seen them over the park, over the pool, these were not the lights that had come down over the landing zones. Then we went to the landing zones and I took samples of the rock. And yes, the UFOologist was correct. Some of the rock samples are very strange. Diatom, I think I forget the name of the rock, but it's usually only found in Aruba. They said, what is this doing here? Well, I researched a little bit more, and I learned that the park was renovating their tennis courts, and this particular rock is an ingredient of a tennis court. So obviously, there'd been a spill from a park truck, and I got to know parkies pretty well. You never admit that you killed grass. Maybe the aliens did it. In the lamppost, the ufologist was absolutely correct about this. The lampposts near the landing sites will magnetize. But with the ranger, I walked through and checked many, many other lampposts. They were all magnetized. So either the UFO comes back to play tennis every night, one possibility, or there was something like a transformer in every Casino Park lamppost. By Occam's razor, you take the simplest of the possibilities. So I then decided you really can't trust the local press too much about this. Well, years go on. A few years ago, there's a release by the Pentagon. And this is on TV and on the computer, and you get to see 2 Navy fighter pilots and an F-18, I believe, off the coast of California, flying from their carrier. And not only did they see it, they interact with the strange, they called it like a pod.
Tic-tac.
Tic-tac, that's right. Yeah. A little tic-tac. And it also appears on radar, both their radar screen and the ships. Now, some people in the SETI field, notably our friend Seth Shostak, came out and said, well, maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they're looking at reflections in the window and stuff like that.
I heard that. That was on public radio. Yeah.
So people like the SETI people have to do this. They don't want to be identified as ufologists, which is why they don't like talking about the possibility of aliens in the solar system. But, you know, I looked at that and said, you have to take this phenomenon seriously. And you put that together with habitable planets all over the place, with what we're knowing about interstellar transit times, even with our primitive understanding today, with what we know about the ages of local stars, what we know about the relative frequency of close stellar encounters. Yeah, I'd say there's a good possibility that they could be in the Kuiper belt. Now, if they're in the Kuiper belt, you no longer can argue that they can't visit the Earth because their speed of light limitation, which may or may not apply to them, who knows. But okay. Then you have to say, why are they visiting? What would they be visiting the Earth for? Well, you had Avi Loeb on talking about Oumuamua, I think is how it's pronounced.
That's close, yeah.
Like that's in Hawaiian.
Yeah.
And he brings up some very interesting points. He says, okay, this thing does seem to look like a light sail. It doesn't seem to look like a comet. And also it comes from a point in the sky, which is basically the centroid of all local stars. Other people have said, well, you know, it's very unlikely this is an interstellar probe because it would take tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years to get here. But what if it's an interstellar probe simply designed to get our attention? In other words, launched locally to be observed locally and then maybe retrieved and come back. And people don't want to talk about that. I think there's a lot of people in the realm, the physics realm, who would like to think that we have totally free will, that we are discovering things for the first time, that there is nobody out there nearby to interfere with us. And there might be, you know, it is very not outside of the range of possibility that there could be millions or even billions of small space habitats in the Kuiper belt, and we have no idea. We can't detect them. There could be smaller objects, probes, or even small bases much nearer, be they dead probes, dead bases, or still existing. I have no idea, but you have to be open to this. The universe is a lot vaster and a lot stranger than we could imagine.
Now, let me ask you this. The phones are open, by the way, if anyone wants to call in. That number is 855-472-5483. Bill is standing by. So let me ask you this. Why would you think that we would be so special that we'd be observed if life could be frequent and everywhere?
Only because they're close and we're close. I mean, they could have come to our Kuiper belt any time within the last billion years. And suddenly they're saying, well, you know, there's somebody there who's interesting. I mean, they're like intelligent termites. Let's go mess with them a little bit, abduct them and kill a few cows, whatever. I mean, you know, you can't, because of what's going on with the Pentagon Papers. By the way, I tried to go through that CIA file and I gave up. Anybody who wants to search for that to find what's useful, I'm sure there's good stuff, but it's so big and so huge. And there's so much which is not good, which is not relevant. So by all means, somebody should go through that and pick out the good stuff from the weed.
Yeah, I know there's a guy named John Greenwald who has these all up online, but there's hundreds of thousands of documents or something like that, right? Something like that.
It's amazing. And some people say, well, maybe these things are advanced technology on the planet. Well, if Russia had that, why would they field an aircraft carrier that breaks down and needs the tugboat every time it goes to Syria, that has toilets that back up, making the crew very uncomfortable, and is so designed that of its 27 fighter planes, 2 of them fall into the ocean during sorties, and the crews have to be rescued. If they could fly with these UFOs, why are they doing that? Why are the Chinese experimenting with aircraft carriers, and they have a fighter plane flying on this thing, which is vertical takeoff and landing, which is nowhere near as good as our F-35. But come on, give me a break. So if the Chinese and the Russians don't have access to this technology, who does? The North Koreans? I certainly hope not. The Iranians? I don't think that might be a good idea either. But whatever, to me, it's very, very, very unlikely. One of my colleagues, I think it's Eric Davis.
Oh, yeah. You know Eric Davis?
Well, I knew from the Discovery Institute. And he also, when my wife was in a show, had her art in the show at the Museum of Las Vegas, he gave her a little tour of the city. He was very nice about this. But Eric also worked for Billingham.
Are you talking about Bigelow?
Bigelow. He worked for Bigelow for the Discovery Institute. And when he was working for Bigelow, he was trying to do scientific studies of UFO incidents. And I believe it was he, it might have been somebody else, interviewed a 4-star brigadier general. Now, I would bet this is Pete Worden, knowing Pete Worden from Breakthrough.
You're talking about the Wilson and the Wilson documents, and I'm not 100% sure if that really happened. There's something really peculiar about that.
Whatever it is, if it did happen, the general said, oh, yes, we have an alien craft, which is in Area 51. We're keeping it secret. We only roll out new technology when we need it. Well, does that solve it? No.
Yeah.
Because the brigadier general, maybe Pete Worden, could be putting out misinformation.
Yeah.
Any foreign power would think twice or 10 times about messing with the United States, who could simply bring out another bit of technology 1 million years or 1 billion years ahead of what we have. So, information could make a difference.
Yeah. I believe you're right. I mean, that's been an MO for a long time, the disinformation for power, that type of thing. But, along those lines, I think this is an interesting conversation. Along those lines, a lot of people have seen these big black triangles that hover. I mean, this is reported everywhere, like sometimes hundreds and hundreds of yards, maybe even a mile wide, these reports, like the Phoenix Lights, for instance, but there's a number of them. But a lot of times people will say, oh, that's just some secret military.
Yeah.
Well, this thing could float and then it shoots off. Like, well, if that's just like you said, if we do have that technology, wouldn't we have used it by now? Or at least
we would have used it in Afghanistan rather than being there for 20 years and not accomplishing anything. I mean, come on, give me a break. People want, like, they have this great conspiracy, but for what purpose? Why?
Yeah.
This is a secret.
Yeah. Here's another hypothetical question to ask you. I always think that we compare what we think an alien civilization would do or not do, violent or not violent, this or that. But we always do it in the way of human thinking.
Yeah.
Would you agree that we have no idea what type of thinking another civilization would have?
I would even take an example. If you have a wet planet like Mars, which has an atmosphere, there was no reason why creatures like spiders could grow to a much larger size. Maybe, who knows, maybe there were intelligent arachnids, spiders, running around the galaxy. Now, my set of ethics, human ethics, say, if I have an intimate relationship with a woman, or she has an intimate relationship with me, we're going to treat each other respectfully, and everybody is going home to go home afterwards and have dinner and be friendly. But if you're a spider, that set of ethics doesn't work. Or if you are evolved from a praying mantis. Because in cases like this, the male better be very careful, because while he's feeling afterglow, she may eat him.
That's right.
And this is the ethics of that particular species, not the ethics of the human species. This is why the Klingons in Star Trek are probably based upon the, what are they called? A type of cat-like creatures and Larry Niven's early war with the. I'm not gonna because I'm talking now. I'm not. My memory isn't working the way it usually does. But these creatures, they're cat-like. They think about things from the point of view of feline dominance, not the way humans do. You surrender to a cat, you might find yourself in a totally different situation than if you surrender to a human. So it's I don't know if you know Seth, another guy from the SETI Institute. Hold on a second. He's a sociologist.
No, I only know Seth and Jill Tarter.
But he's come up with the concept of altruism, that an alien civilization will only survive for a very long period of, Doug Vakush, will only survive for a long enough period of time to contact or fly somewhere if it is altruistic. And basically, the concept of altruism might be species dependent. We don't know this.
Wow. Yeah. And, there's a lot of speculation, like, okay, whatever it is that's visiting us, I think you mentioned this even, what do they want? What do they want? Why are they here? And, that can be a scary thought, if you think about it. And if the Air Force can't control the skies, that a lot of people speculate that's why it's not talked about much, because how would they possibly explain they have no control over something?
That's a very good point. And that's why we have misinformation.
Yeah.
And that may also be why for so many decades, it was a no-no for a military flyer, a commercial flyer, or a private flyer to admit that they'd seen things. I once had a brother of a guy we knew who was a commercial pilot. I asked, "You ever see a UFO?" He said, "I'll never admit it." And there was a private pilot who told me he has seen them, but he's never claimed it to the tower. And the reason is, then people might say, well, there's something wrong with this guy's perception. He shouldn't be in the driver's seat anymore, or take away his flying license or something like that.
Yeah, that happened. I can't remember. It's JAL. It was a Japanese airline, but it was there was a shipping flight, not a commercial passenger flight. And that was over Alaska. There was a 300 some odd mile encounter that was something that looked like a large walnut. Wow. And had little like baby ships type going around this thing. And so they went around out of their course, and the thing followed them and actually like circled around. It was all on radar and everything. Well, that pilot had a desk job after that.
Yeah, I believe
and
it.
he was reporting it live. But he did get back to flying again. 30 years of experience, and that happened. And it
don't think it'll happen anymore because of the Pentagon releases. I think at this point it's taken seriously.
Yes, I think that's been a great thing, and I'm glad I'm doing this show during this whole time, because I'm not so embarrassed to admit that I do a show when I'm talking to someone about antiques and art. UFOs can come up, I won't feel so embarrassed. It's not that I'm embarrassed; it's just that I can be looked at in a different way, because of, well, you're an art expert and you like UFOs. So, what do you think about the taboo side of that? I mean, you must have seen a lot of that over the years.
Oh my, okay. One of the interesting phenomenon in this associated with this is the abduction phenomenon. And I know of a mathematician and a physicist who would kill me if I mentioned their names, who have reported that they were almost abducted at one point or another. They saw strange lights near them and it looked like a silvery craft in one case. And my wife C and I know of a woman who, I'm not going to mention her name either. She started life as a very successful financial lawyer on Wall Street. And she got tired of this, became a combination astrologer, psychic, and rock singer. Interesting combination.
Wow.
At one of her concerts, she pointed out on her neck the 2 marks that they deliver when they abduct her. And I spoke to one of her fans after this, and the fans had the same thought I did. Was her boyfriend a little kinky? So I had strange feelings about the abduction phenomenon. Then my wife C. Bangs, was in an art show in the Chelsea section of Brooklyn a couple of years after that. And there's a woman who attended the show who said, "Look, I like your art. It's space related. I'm taking part in planning this conference, which will be in Hoboken, New Jersey. It's about SETI. It is called the Conscious Contact, Consciousness of Contact, something like that. I forget the exact name for it." And she said, "Yeah." And they said, "Maybe your husband will be on one of the panels." So we went there, and it was in an old theater that Frank Sinatra used to perform in, which was interesting. And see her work, and every other piece of work in the show had the standard picture of aliens with big bug eyes, green faces, sort of fetus shaped. And we both looked at each other and said, "Oh, this is what is going on, which is happening in this, what we're involved in." So I went into the panel and I served in it with a number of other people. I was the only scientist on it. There was a writer, there was a psychologist, and in the middle of it, a very eloquent, ordinary suburban New Jersey woman gets up and she says, "I have a problem that maybe you can help me with." And she said, "I've been abducted 7 times. And each time I'm abducted, I get pregnant. They remove the fetus.
Wow.
I have only been able to see the children when they abduct me the next time. What can you do about it?" Well, I hemmed and hawed a bit. The psychologist hemmed and hawed a bit. Later on, afterwards, during a break, when I was speaking to the psychologist, he said, "Well, this is a standard symptom of a woman who has been sexually abused when she was a child. Because what she does is, apparently it's not uncommon, is she's being tormented basically by people who are supposed to be her protectors. Family, they love her, but they are doing something that's damaging. So she internalizes it in this particular fashion. And it's not an unusual psychological aspect. This is not to say that people haven't been abducted. The Bonnie Hill case, for instance, that's a very interesting one. I don't know what happened there, but I know that in some cases, a psychological explanation might make sense. Not in all, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I've kind of bounced back and forth with that whole segment of this. I think it's really interesting. I think it's a possibility, and the reason I think it's a possibility, at least for some, is that you think about it. If whatever it is visiting here, why wouldn't they go a step further and maybe examine? And I've had we have someone on the line, and I think it's a friend actually. So I'm going to hang on just 1 second here. I got to move a couple things around. And all right, we're ready. Dean from LA. Dean.
Yes. Hey, I came in late. Is this about UFOs? Just kidding. So here's my question.
Well, maybe not. Well,
so-
yeah, but go ahead. Yeah.
Are all of the above. So here's my question. It seems like these pilots, especially as an example, Fravor, felt that the object that they're seeing is reactive. In other words, it responds to them as almost like it's aware, it's self-aware. If that's the case, do you think that they mean to be seen? And second of all, the next layer is, if they do, is that so that we are aware that we're not the only ones here, that there is something else going on? And so sometimes these sightings are meant to be something that just makes us more aware about the possibility beyond us.
Okay, I think that's an excellent question. And what I would say is, from our own experience on this planet, when a technologically advanced culture meets for the first time a technologically less advanced culture, it's curtains for the less advanced. It's not good. Maybe they realize this. Maybe particularly if they're in our Kuiper belt, as I think is a possibility. They realize that they're a billion years ahead of us, perhaps. They know that what could happen if we had too early a contact, and they are doing a lot of these things to sort of prepare us, to put us in a mindset where it won't destroy us, and we can actually maybe join a galactic community down the line. But that's my take. That's assuming that they're benign. And I think you have to assume that they're benign, because if they were malign, if they wanted to get rid of us, it would be very easy for them to move a few asteroids slightly.
Yeah.
That's all it would take.
I never thought of that, but you're right. That's all they'd have to do is line that baby up like going bowling or something. Yeah. Anything else, Dean?
No, that's it. Now I'm thinking about bowling, thinking about the Big Lebowski and UFOs. It's a perfect combination. Thank you. Appreciate your
Hey,
feedback.
Dean, we'll see you on Monday.
Yes,
right?
you will. All right.
Yeah.
Be safe, everyone. All right.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Yeah. He's visiting out in the area and
That's right.
and doing some filming. That is a question that a lot of people have said on or asked on this show is, why whatever it is that's flying overhead, why does it have lights? Why does it want to be seen? I think that's a really good question.
I think, if somebody just transferred, or different species transferred to our Kuiper belt over the last billion years, and all of a sudden they see us developing, they may realize that sooner or later there's going to have to be a contact. And why not prepare us for it slowly, gradually? I mean, there's some very interesting things in the solar system that could be maybe signs of artificiality. There was a moon of Saturn called Methone, Methone, and look it up online. It is maybe a couple of miles long, and it's perfectly egg-shaped and completely smooth. People say it's not smooth because it's close to the rings. I don't believe that. Maybe it is, but of course, maybe it isn't. And when I mentioned my colleague Les Johnson at NASA Marshall wanted to do a science fiction novel, he said, "Greg, name me an anomalous object in the solar system." And he mentioned Methone, and he came up with a book called Mission to Methone. Another one is the smaller Kuiper belt object that was visited by New Horizons called MU69. And you may remember that MU69 of Ultima Thule initially looked like two spherical objects that are joined together. And the various models that people put together that I've seen of the planetologists, they're good models. They can show you can have two spherical icy objects coming together at low velocity. But the later pictures show that they're shaved off on the bottom, that they're not spheres, but like partial spheres. So either something shaved them to make them non-spherical beforehand, and then put them in such a position that they would still line up, showing exactly the same way. Or after they're lined up, barely stuck together, something came and shaved off their bottoms, but didn't disturb them. To me, that's an anomaly. I don't have an explanation for it. I haven't seen any real explanations, and I would say it's a strange one. Whether it was done by aliens, whether it was done for us, another little thing saying, hey, get them ready for it, or maybe there's another natural, physical, mechanical explanation that I can't think of. I don't know.
Right. Well, we're getting close to being out of time. I'm just going to pop up your book here. And so Stellar Engineering, I highly recommend it. It's a book you're going to start and not want to put down. It's really fascinating. And I've really enjoyed our talk very much this evening.
I did too. Thank you.
Yeah. And so we'll talk soon. And I hope you have really good luck with this book. And remember, you have to write one more to get that number 14.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Have a good evening, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye. All right, everyone. So next week, we have Frank Ficino talking about the Flatwoods monster incident, a real unusual one there. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.